means.
Just a little south of where I'm standing here by the Golden Gate is an area known as the Offal. The Offal means a fortified hill or a risen area. And just immediately south of the Offal is another hill where the city of Jebus once stood.
In 586 BC, the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar conquered and plundered Jerusalem, and Solomon's temple was burned.
In approximately 700 BC, 100 years before Cyrus was born, the prophet Isaiah prophesied that a king named Cyrus would allow the temple to be rebuilt after Nebuchadnezzar had destroyed it.
Isaiah's prophecy was fulfilled in 536 BC, when the Persian king Cyrus allowed the Jews in captivity to return to Jerusalem under the leadership of Nehemiah. And after the walls were rebuilt, a second Jewish temple was built on the foundation of Solomon's temple by the Jewish leader Zerubbabel.
A full 500 years passed before Herod the Great ordered a massive reconstruction and embellishment of the temple.
This is a detailed model of Jerusalem and Herod's temple constructed in 1973 by the famous historian Michael Avi-Yori, on display in the past. No trees can be planted in the courtyard as long as the third and final temple remains unbuilt.
After the destruction of the Jewish temple in 70 AD, the Jews never rebuilt a third temple during all those years. But why? I'm joined by Robert Mandelbaum, who's an eschatologist and Bible researcher. Robert, why was this? Why have the Jews never rebuilt their temple?
Well, thanks for having me, Chris. It's great to be here. After 70 AD, the Jews were scattered throughout all of the world, and there came a time when Jews were not even allowed to live or visit Jerusalem. They wanted, of course, to rebuild their temple, and thanks to the Temple Institute, which is just behind us, all the plans are already made. The sacrificial altar has been recently constructed. The priest robes have been made. Pretty much everything is ready to go.
Robert, help us understand, why is it so important to the Jewish religion to rebuild their temple? What is the significance of the temple to them?
Well, Chris, there's many important reasons, but the primary reason, the number one reason, is the Jewish people do not believe their Messiah will arrive until that temple is rebuilt.
So what's the problem? With everything set and ready to go, what's to stop the third temple being built? Well, the problem is that building you see over there above the Western Wall. It's called the Dome of the Rock.
The Dome of the Rock was built by the Arab Caliph Abd al-Malik in 691 AD. It stands on what is known as the Temple Mount, on the Haram al-Sharif.
The Haram al-Sharif is currently the site of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which has a silver dome, and the Dome of the Rock, which has a golden dome. And it has a tradition from the 12th century of being the place where Muhammad's stepped off of the earth and onto his horse, and then the horse was taken up into heaven, and so was Muhammad. That's a very late source. It is not from the Quran, but it's a traditional Muslim source.
It's the Haram, a lot of people call it the Temple Mount, Dome of the Rock, the Al-Aqsa Mosque. It's this incorporated area that I call the Temple Mount platform that is 36 acres that's up on the Temple Mount area. And it's controlled and managed by the Muslims. And the Jews desperately would love to build their temple. They believe it's somewhere up on that platform. A lot of people say it's the south or the north, or they're not really sure to where the temple was, but most people will say that is the area of where Solomon's and Herod's temples once were.
Will be helpful. And all you have to do is study some verses out of Nehemiah chapter 2 and Nehemiah chapter 3. And again, it pinpoints and gives a very clear description of where the temple was built. The key word in that verse, Nehemiah 2:15, is brook. I went up by the brook. And if you look at Nehemiah 3:7, it uses the word river. There's only one brook, one river, one stream within 5 square miles of Jerusalem. There is no river, no brook, no running.
This is from Joel, Ezekiel, and from the Psalms, several Psalms. Put it all together, and there was a fountain in the temple at the top of the city of David, on the top of Mount Zion, at that temple. And it also existed in the reconstruction by King Herod.
Well, the Gihon Spring is an ancient water source that's been talked about, going way back to the time of Solomon. The springs are still running today. They're not of the force of water that they were a long time ago. A lot of Jerusalem has been dug up, and the rock might have, through fracturing and modern construction, have precipitated that. But the Gihon Springs has been this ribbon of water that's the lifeblood of the city of David. It's like water pumping through the veins of a human. The city of David has this water pumping through it, which gives his life and gave it the reason
Which was on the mercy seat.
We're here in the city of David, where so many things happened.
To film this part of the interview on the Haram al-Sharif, but of course you're not allowed to film there. So at a scenic spot by the old city walls. But Robert, I want to ask you, what is the Haram al-Sharif? What does it actually mean?
Haram al-Sharif means noble sanctuary. It's where the Dome of the Rock is located, as well as the Al-Aqsa Mosque. It's the third most holy place in the Islamic religion.
And it's quite a wide area. So back before the Dome of the Rock and Al-Aqsa Mosque were built, back in the time of Jesus and the time of the temples, if the temples weren't standing there, then what was up there in that large area?
Well, that was Fort Antonia, and that's where Titus housed the 10th Legion, which consisted of 6,000.
Digging in every spot, in every centimeters, they flipped everything, even each inch was taked, they couldn't find any evidence that the Temple Mount is beneath the Haram Sharif, or what they call the Temple Mount now. And that's a fact, everybody knows that,
That's the temple and not the Fort Antonia. The stones should not be Herodian stones at the base, they should be Solomonic stones. So that fact alone, that there's no Solomonic stones, but they did find the Solomonic stones in the city of David, and they did find the tower that Nehemiah built. They found it there. They have the archaeological evidence of the oil lamps and the pottery from the Persian era from that time. In an area where Jews were not intermingling with Romans, it had to be big enough that you could house your at least a legion of soldiers. That beside the soldiers that you had to have personnel that was working. You had a red light district. You had to have restaurants. You had to have probably 10 to 15,000 people. And whenever you look at a model of Jerusalem, like you saw in Jerusalem by Yonah, they always make Fort Antonia this tiny little fort that couldn't probably hold 100 people.
The model that we have at the Israeli Museum is a beautiful model. It's a great piece of art, but a poor piece of historical reflection. For instance, I believe that the Roman fort there is ridiculous. It's just this little appendage. The mighty Roman fortress has been reduced to this small little caricature that they have there in that model. So I don't think that the model maker there made an accurate representation. But what he did do is he's impregnated into the mind of a lot of visitors a warped concept of the size of...
Particularly at holy days, and there were thousands of troops that had to be there to quench any kind of trouble that would come. And like I said, the dimensions of the harem being exactly the dimensions of every Roman fort and completely opposite of any dimension of the Temple Mount that's told us in the historical records is another proof that that just couldn't be the Temple Mount.
We're on the Mount of Olives overlooking the old city of Jerusalem, where we get a very clear view. Robert, tell us, how was the city of Jerusalem different 2,000 years ago than what we see here today?
Well, of course, Chris, the Dome of the Rock would not have been there. And what you're looking at was never the old city of Jerusalem. Those walls represent Fort Antonia, where Titus housed the 10th Legion, which eventually destroyed all of Jerusalem, and the temple itself. Where I'm pointing right here, where that clump of trees are, which today is called the City of Zion, which is on top of a mountain called the Ophel, that is actually where the original temple once stood. And just to the south of that, and I mean just meters south, was the city of David, also known as the Citadel. And the entire city of Jerusalem, with the temple, stood in that area right there.
The reason we know that it's there is because Josephus, the Jewish historian, who lived in Jerusalem, and he was there and present at the destruction of Jerusalem, and he saw it in a destroyed condition afterwards, and he was given the Jewish records of King Herod as to the construction of Fort Antonia, and he was given the Roman records in regard to the Jewish wars, who did what when and who destroyed what, and how the war progressed.
Josephus was a first century historian. He was Jewish, commander that was conscripted to be sort of a historian of sorts. His writing is impeccably accurate. People say, oh, he's so great of a historian.
The north vantage point, if you would approach Jerusalem from the north, and everything fits. Fortress Antonia being that structure, that it stopped being Fort Antonia. After Jerusalem was destroyed, it had a different name. It was actually the center of Aelia Capitolina, which was the renamed terminology for the city of Jerusalem. Emperor Hadrian decided to eliminate Jerusalem by changing the name and causing the reconstruction of the entire city. And it became to be quite a large city. And for a long period of time, it was a Roman fortress housing the 10th Legion Fretensis until about 300 years, 250 years after the destruction of Jerusalem. That 10th Legion was based there.
The temple was destroyed in 70 AD, and then it really wasn't much of a city until it was rebuilt and renamed Aelia Capitolia, which was its new name, and it was a new city. So then it really took a very strong resurgence after the time of Constantine, when Constantine built the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Then it really started taking off again, and then from then on it had a steady growth up until the time of the Crusades in 1099. Took another growth spurt there, and then it's pretty much stabilized after that, after the Muslims had it in the 7th century. There's a lot of argument as to when people started believing that the temple was on the Temple Mount. My personal belief is that in 1099, when the Crusaders conquered the Temple Mount complex today, and they saw the Muslim dome with the crescent moon on it, they ripped it off. They put a cross on there, called it the Templum Domini, which is Latin for the Lord's Temple. And from that point on, it became very popular throughout Europe that was the temple area. People did argue about it for some extent. They didn't know where the real temple was. But in time, they just settled on it. There was a man named Tudela, Benjamin Tudela, in the 12th century, very charismatic man, rabbi. And he said, hey guys, let's just settle on this. And people have, and tradition has sent its taproot down and taken root in both the church and both the Jewish belief systems. And from that point on, it's become historical fact, when I think it's been terribly, terribly mangled in history. And we have a wrong perception of where the temple is located traditionally, because it should be in the city of David.
all graves.
Well, from where we are on the Mount of Olives, we can see behind us the graves of thousands of Jews who wanted to be buried here. Why? Why did they want to be buried right here, right up against the Mount of Olives?
Well, according to Zechariah, the Messiah is going to return to the Mount of Olives. The Mount of Olives is going to leave in half's going to go toward the north, half toward the south, and the Jews as well believe this is where the resurrection is going to take place.
But of course, the Jews believe that the Messiah can't come until the temple is rebuilt. So if it could be shown that the temple never stood where the Dome of the Rock now stands, but stood somewhere else, then that would solve the problem.
Abomination of desolation, spoken of by Daniel the prophet and quoted by Jesus in Matthew 24.
This abomination of desolation, or the image of the beast, as John calls him in the book of Revelation,
2,000 years.
and if the Jewish people could accept the overwhelming evidence, the city of David on the southeast ridge of Jerusalem, one thing is certain.